Welcome to 24 Karis. I'm Kelly Johnson, founder of Karis by KJE. We are in for a new series that will be a treat for you. We're going to be talking about inclusive leadership with an amazing panel of amazing leaders. So excited to be here with you today. So we have Chip Bond from Keurig Dr. Pepper, Ana Rodriguez from SMU, and Kamecia Mason from McCarthy Building Companies. So, and now, of course, I have my partner, my colleague, Annalise Alamo. So thanks, everybody. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. We are going to dive into inclusive leadership, and we want to just sort of set the stage of kind of tell a little bit about just your role and how inclusive leadership, how you define it. Like, how do you think or come to this topic? Chip, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I thought this was a great question. And I think the first thing I want to say is, if you are not being inclusive, you aren't leading. And so kind of with that as a headline, to me, there are three pieces of being an inclusive leader that kind of link more to a personal philosophy around be loving, be humble, and be hardworking. I think as a leader, when you apply that to a team, the loving piece is about you need to truly care and have compassion for the people on your team. The humility part is really making sure that you're checking yourself in terms of not projecting what you think that your team members want. Truly ask them questions, like have an understanding of what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve in life. And then from a hard work standpoint, you need to be their advocate. Creating opportunity for the people on your team is one of the foundational components of being a leader. And so if you aren't doing that, you're missing, you can do the first two, but you're not providing the full range of support that you could.
Well,
so good.
So we're just going right in, and I love it. This is amazing. If you're not being an inclusive leader, you're not leading. I love it. Yes. All right, Ana, what would you add?
I completely agree. I think so much of it is external, right? So it's not about who you are, it's about how you serve others. And so for me, inclusive leadership is leading with intention and with purpose, right? So making sure that you are being cognizant of others, but also very welcoming. And I think that's the biggest part, and where there's some confusion around inclusion, because there's the word diversity oftentimes goes with it. And so people think, well, if I'm not of a certain demographic, that it doesn't apply to me. But when the whole definition of inclusion is for it to be welcoming to everyone. So I think, as Chip said, we all play a part.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
Well, they're not leaving very much left for me to say. I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I think what inclusive leadership means for me is really understanding the whole person. There's so much of ourselves that people understand about who we are at work. I know what each person on my team does in terms of their function, but it's important for me to also know who they are as an individual. What are their hobbies? What do they like? What's their family situation? To the extent that they're willing to share.
Right.
Because who we are all day is also the person that we are at work. And when I forget to acknowledge that, I've also failed to be a leader. There's so much of our personal context that comes into work that impacts how well we show up. And I need everyone around me to know that bringing that whole self is important.
Yeah. So I want to double click on something you said, Kamecia, because I know your role is within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So clearly you live it personally and for your organization. Absolutely. But can you speak to the person who says, hey, I just want people who are going to do their job. I don't need to get to know you. I don't need to know about your family situation. Like, speak to the person that just sees like that's not important.
I would honestly challenge that person on that perspective. When we walk into the office and you step inside of a break room, most people are talking about how their weekend went, or what game they went to, or perhaps what they brought their mom for Mother's Day this week. And that is all elements of who an individual is. And into Anna's point about what we really think about when we think about diversity, all of those things are different elements of what diversity really means. And understanding that and allowing that person to show up, the individual that is saying is, I just want people to work, that's not true, because they spend time in the break room, at a desk, people feel better when they have a work best friend. Like, just the statistics show that. So when you have someone that you can relate to, you show up and you perform better. And I would be certain that an individual that felt that way also wants to have that relationship at work. Work is so much about relationship.
And if I may add to that, I think another part of it is not even just looking at, I think it's more giving the invitation that it's okay to share or to be authentic. And I think that's part of what a lot of people miss, is the fact that there are people that are, if you're working so hard to suppress part of you, right, to really not stand out, because you may be the only woman, the only person of color. So when you're working so hard on trying to cover that part of you, wearing a mask almost, then you're not able to focus on your work, right? I'm not giving 100% of myself to my job if, I'm repressing things. I'm only giving 80 or 90%. So in addition to you challenging them, I would also say it's also going to affect productivity overall. Yeah. Because if you have people that are so focused, or they just don't feel comfortable sharing or being themselves, whether they want to share or not, that's not really the point. The point is, if they're not able to really be themselves and they're focusing part of their energy on that, then you're not getting the most efficient, the most productive employee. And I think overall, that's what companies care about, right? And so I just think it's important not just to see it from the lens of, it's just so important for us to be welcoming and inclusive of everyone.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think not a ton to add, but I say to my team explicitly, we are people, not work robots, on a regular basis. And honestly, the reason for that is, if we're playing pretend and acting like there is not something that exists outside of work, you won't have employees for long, because they will realize that by suppressing everything or neglecting other parts of their lives, that this job doesn't fit in the grand scheme of things, and they're gonna eventually look for a change. Yeah. And I'd rather be able to create longevity, continuity, and give folks a feeling that they have a future in this role and it fits with their lives.
Yeah. I think what you all are saying is so important, and thankfully, it's 2023 and we are having more conversations about the importance of mental health, overall well-being. But I would also say right now we hear a lot about burnout. And I think burnout is associated with how much, not just the work itself, right? I think all of us work hard, all of us try to give kind of the extra incremental effort. But burnout to me comes when mentally and emotionally, I'm also having to spend energy in a way that isn't necessarily about only the work, right? It's the amount of energy that I need to find, dig deep, and tap into to navigate a difficult conversation or engage a colleague who's not very collaborative, right? Who is territorial, or, just some of the other dynamics, and or working for a leader who doesn't recognize or see me for some of the circumstances that I may have going on in my personal life. So anyone just want to maybe speak to kind of the burnout issue and maybe how inclusive leadership could play a role in counteracting that?
Yeah, there's a concept that when I was at Boston Consulting Group, they taught when you do your first training on becoming a project leader, and they try to make the distinction between eustress and distress. And what they point out is that stress can be motivating if you feel equipped to handle the challenge that you've got in front of you. Part of being equipped to handle it is feeling like your team or your leader is supportive of you being in that position, and they have an understanding of what it is you're trying to do, and they've got your back. Distress is when you don't feel like you're prepared or equipped. And I think that is what brings it back to inclusive leadership for me. Don't create opportunity for your teams by throwing them to the wolves or pretending you don't care. Be very intentional about, I'm putting you in this position because I know you can handle it. Here's the reasons why. And I have your back if you have questions.
Yeah, so good.
There's a couple of really important things that you hit on around burnout and inclusive leadership, especially around collaboration. So much of what is needed from an inclusive leader is the ability to share the right amount of information at the appropriate amount of time, giving every individual the opportunity to excel at the work that they're doing. And so if the work that I'm doing requires the input or the partnering from another individual, and that's being blocked, of course it's going to increase my level of burnout, because I have these tactical things that I have to get done. And one of the things that I really love about our culture is that we really focus on the big we and not the I. And when that returns itself, when we start looking at holistically, this project isn't about what I need to get done or what my team needs to get done. It's about what our company needs to grow, and we're all invested in that growth. When we do that, we're headed in the right direction. When that breaks down, that collaboration goes away, that timeliness goes away, it puts everyone in a position where you're spinning out, and it's not healthy. And you talk about what that means from a mental health capacity standpoint. The workload just continues to increase. If one thing we learned from COVID, we learned how to quickly pivot, and we learned how to stack meetings, and we learned how to be a million places at one time. If we're not being inclusive and still going back to that whole person understanding that your last minute decision to no longer be collaborative or to burn up my time that I really needed with my family so that I could refresh and come back at 110% tomorrow, it goes back to what we said. It breaks down the effectiveness of what we're trying to do as a company and our strategy and our goals. And it also erodes who I get to show up as a person.
Yeah. So Anna, I want you to maybe take this in a little bit of a different perspective, because you sit in a role today with SMU Cox School of Business, the Latino Leadership Initiative program. So you get to interface with hundreds of organizations. I would love to just have you maybe kickstart us on a conversation of what's the impact of an inclusive leader in an organization? How have you seen organizations who are committed to building inclusive leaders, supporting leaders? What's the impact on a broader level?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's really, there's so many different studies that show that diversity, or companies that value diversity, are more competitive, right? And so specifically with what I do with my role in working with companies to help them attract, retain, and develop these high-performing Latino leaders, it really comes down to there's a business case for it. So absolutely it's the right thing to do, but I think overall the case has definitely been made that companies are more competitive and they're more profitable, which ultimately that's what companies really should look at. But when you think about how companies that are behind, not only are they just less efficient, less productive, but also they're losing people. And that's one of the biggest things, is that being inclusive benefits everyone, not just the minorities, right? And so I think whenever you do have that type of welcoming environment, you can tell, and especially with companies with a high turnover, companies that are always looking to just bring in new talent versus promoting from within, I think that really does make a huge difference. And so when companies look at where they should be investing their HR, their talent development, I mean, it makes more sense for them to develop their internal talent versus going out to try to find, a minority VP, right, versus someone that they've grown from within their ranks. So I think for companies, it's a no-brainer, and the companies that are paying attention are definitely profiting, and making sure that they are inclusive are the ones that are going to win in the end, especially when you think about the demographics of this country and how quickly it's changing as well. And so I just think there's going to be a lot of companies that either go away or just get stuck behind the times because of the fact that they don't have that type of inclusive environment.
Yeah, that's so cool. So we're actually getting close to wrapping up this particular part of our conversation. The time is totally flying because you all are just having a great conversation and giving us so much insight and perspective on this important topic. I would love, Chip, to just hear your voice, and Kamecia, about impact of inclusive leadership. How have you seen it? Maybe from leaders that you've worked with, or even perhaps on your team, the teams you lead.
Yeah, I think the best example I've seen is from the leaders that I have had. I have worked for a couple of individuals, and I'll use a example to paint a color picture of this. Both of these leaders, because of faith reasons, don't drink alcohol, but they were leading teams where that was a unique kind of perspective on life, and it's actually an incredibly impactful thing when you see someone in that situation still be intentional about going and spending time with the team when the team is doing social events or outings, where it would be very easy to feel like, oh, they don't want to hang out with us because of fill in the blank. They think X or Y or Z. When you see a behavior turn that on its head and demonstrate the desire to build trust, build relationship, and be together, that starts to get at the root of what it feels like for someone to be inclusive, and and dispel any suspicion about what they think of the other folks on the team. And so those have both been incredible teams to be on.
That's such a great example, right? And something that happens often, right? Teams get together socially outside of work. I know, we kind of had to relearn how to do that during the pandemic, and some of that's starting to come back. But I think that's a great example of a leader being authentic, true to their values, but still building relationships with individuals who have different perspectives and different kind of life choices. So I love that. Kamecia, what would you add?
I would say, again, using the same examples of leaders that I've been around, but what I've seen the impact of is the leaders that are not afraid to challenge in the moment. This is the season where we're starting to begin the talent review process, and I've heard really strong leaders talk about, as you're going through a group of talent, there's always these instances where perhaps women in construction might be compared to men in construction, and some of those women are making choices about family, and inevitably that may come up in talent review. And those individuals that have been willing to challenge and say, yeah, so what? She's starting a family. Is anything changing? Is she ready? Are you developing her the way that she needs to be developed for whatever's next? And turning those conversations on their head right there in the moment, nudging backwards, is not intentional. It's an unconscious bias of folks believing that because you're in that season of your life that means your work is going to take a back seat. But those leaders who pause for a moment and say, no, this individual is ready for this next new amazing challenge, and we're not going to allow personal decisions to impact the great work that we know that this person can do. And we're going to make sure that they get to that next spot. That is not only inclusion, but equity in play at the same time.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And we're going to actually pick up on kind of that courage and that in the moment, like what's needed of inclusive leaders when we come back for the next conversation. So you all have been great, already providing such foundational and really important understanding of what inclusive leadership is, kind of how you personally define it, how you've seen it in your own careers. And then I think even more importantly, what's the impact? Collaboration, managing burnout, really making sure that there's equity in our decisions and authenticity. So the financial return, you all hit it all in a really quick amount of time. So Annalise, I'm sorry we didn't get to your question.
You're fine. I am learning as I am listening. Yes.
So this has been great. We are so appreciative of what you all are already sharing. So this has been another amazing episode of 24 Karas. Make sure that you come back because we're going to continue this conversation with this fantastic panel of inclusive leaders who are doing great things in their organizations. As always, at 24 Karas, our goal is to help you live your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion 24/7. And I hope that you will like, share, and subscribe this episode. Share it in your organizations. If you want to help build a culture of inclusion in your organization, our guests are sharing a lot of great wisdom that can help change your culture, strengthen your culture. Until next time, we'll see you soon.